Thank you very much for taking your time and coming here at this meeting. I'm honored and pleased to be here together with you tonight. I will first do a sort of a presentation about this topic, and afterwards I believe you have comments and questions to ask, so I will try to be as short as possible. Next February will be 4 years since Kosovo declared its independence. 84 countries recognized the independence of Kosovo so far, including here 22 out of 27 members of European Union. But since the path toward independence did not include self-determination of people of Kosovo, consequently, independence did not include sovereignty for the state of Kosovo. Kosovo continues to be under international protectorate with no army of its own and without any control over a quarter of its territory. Resolution of General Assembly of UN of the 9th of September 2010 did spin the meaning of advisory opinion of International Court of Justice, which concluded that declaration of independence did not violate international law. This resolution calls for new talks between Kosovo and Serbia under the supervision and mediation of the European Union. Dialogue started on the 8th of March of this year without any transparency of its agenda, without public and parliamentary debates in Kosovo. Dialogue was called technical dialogue, as if character of the dialogue, rather than the character of the topics of the dialogue, was technical, and this means as if political aspect of the dialogue was done somewhere else, with someone else, for something else, and not here where we're doing merely a technical dialogue. Because it was never said that this dialogue is about technical issues, but it is a technical dialogue. So issues were political, but dialogue about them was technical. For a few months, Deputy Prime Minister of Kosovo, together with political director in Foreign Ministry of Serbia, held several rounds of talks on civil registry, university diploma, cadastral documents, customs, telecommunications, energy, etc. There were put no conditions for Serbia prior to this dialogue, which turned internal issues of Kosovo into topics of dialogue. So, by negotiating with Serbia, by talking with Serbia, without putting any prior conditions to Serbia, normally we ended up in discussing about ourselves, discussing about issues which are internal issues of Kosovo. In this way, in Brussels, they spoke of custom stamps of Kosovo, not of those of Serbia. So they were negotiating what kind of custom stamps will have Kosovo in the future, but not what kind of custom stamps will have Serbia. So a very one-sided dialogue about internal issues of Kosovo with Serbia, which was unconditioned beforehand. Likewise, they did not discuss about what card plates should have Serbia, but only what card plates should have Kosovo. And consequently, we ended up with a solution where Kosovo is supposed for another 5 years to issue card plates from the UNMIK time. So the Republic of Kosovo was forced to maintain UNMIK alive, something against which actually declared independence, just as it declared independence against Serbia. Dialogue in Brussels, whose goal is proclaimed to be normalization of relations between Kosovo and Serbia, is achieving this normalization, therefore, by changing Kosovo, not by changing Serbia. When we want to achieve a certain normalization, this implies that there is a certain abnormal situation that we want to change. But the abnormality of the situation that we want to change, and this process that we call normalization, has to change something. And this something is Kosovo, it's not Serbia. So again, it is us who are supposed to change in this normalization of relations with Serbia, when actually it should be exactly the opposite. In normalization of in the normalization of relations between Kosovo and Serbia, it is Serbia which should be changed. I will name 10 reasons against this dialogue which could be turned into conditions for Serbia. Only by fulfilling them we could say afterwards that Serbia has changed and we can have principled talks with her. As long as Serbia is not conditioned, we cannot say that these talks have any principles. First, Serbia doesn't recognize the independence of Kosovo. Second, in Serbia's constitution is written that Kosovo is part of Serbia. Third, Serbia didn't apologize for the crimes of the past and neither shows regret or penitence. Fourth, Serbia finances and controls power structures in Kosovo. Fifth, Serbia didn't handle the war criminals in Kosovo. Sixth, Serbia didn't return the bodies of 1,800 missing persons from Kosovo. Seventh, Serbia didn't pay a cent for war damages it caused in Kosovo. Eighth, Serbia violates the rights of Albanians in Serbia, majority of whom live in Preševa, Lëvizja, and Buenos. Ninth, Serbia didn't return the pension fund, bank deposits, cadastral books, and cultural artifacts it stole from Kosovo before the war and during the war. And the last one, but not the least importance, there are tens of thousands of war criminals in Serbia walking free there under no investigation from state prosecutors. We know that in former Yugoslavia, in 4 different wars, altogether close to 200,000 non-Serbs were killed. Slovenes, Croats, Bosniaks, and Albanians. If one Serbian policeman or paramilitary or soldier killed 4 people, this means that we have 50,000 Serbian serial murderers walking free today in Serbia. A few dozens of them are in prison. So this shows that Serbia didn't really change, and the prosecution in Serbia didn't do much despite the change in the regime regarding this issue. Therefore, changes from Milosevic to Koštunica and from Koštunica to Tadić were certainly systematically overrated by Brussels. Changes in Serbia were changes for Serbia and in Serbia, and not changes for Kosovo or in Kosovo. Constitution of Serbia didn't change toward Kosovo with the changes of presidents and prime ministers in Belgrade. Likewise, none of the leaders of Belgrade, once they came to a government seat, started to dismantle the power structures in Kosovo. Power structures were left there by the regime of Milosevic and were maintained and strengthened by the regime of Koštunica and Tadić. Eventually, they competed who will exercise more control over these power structures, but not who is going to dismantle them faster. So it is true that there are different streams in Belgrade, political streams, who think differently about power structures in Kosovo, but not in the sense of changing their mission or dismantling them altogether, but merely on the issue of who's going to have more control over them, within the same frame and for the same goal. In Serbia, there are no significant left-wing parties, and liberals get usually only a few percent. In Serbia, there are no politicians for whom we could say that they inherited Dimitrije Tucovic or even Vladimir Ivanovic or Milan Piroćanac. The dominant political scene in Belgrade is a heritage of Nikola Pašić. I really believe that in Serbia, we do not have a new political leader in the visionary sense after Nikola Pašić. And we know very well to what he actually belonged. Parallel to these 10 absent conditions for Serbia, there are 2 present asymmetries in this dialogue. First, as I mentioned earlier, dialogue in Brussels is not about issues of Kosovo and Serbia, but only of Kosovo. For example, Serbia demands for Kosovo Serbs what it doesn't allow to Albanians in Serbia. And secondly, the EU is both mediating the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia and ruling over Kosovo via executive powers of the Olympics. So EU is not a neutral mediator, because it rules over us and mediates between us and Serbia. So there is this second aspect, or second asymmetry in this dialogue, which places Kosovo into inferior position. Kosovo made Serbia look good in front of EU through this dialogue, as if nothing really happened in the past, shaking hands, like joint smiles of Tahiri and Borislav Stefanovic enabled Serbia to look differently toward EU and helped Serbia a lot in her in improvement of the image toward EU. But on the other hand, this dialogue is halting the integration of Serbs in Kosovo. In Kosovo as society and in Kosovo as institutions as well. Because Serbs in Kosovo, once the dialogue between Pristina and Belgrade starts, they think, well, Kosovo has not been resolved as an issue altogether. So it's an open question. And if there are two sides about Kosovo, then we can choose. And if we can choose between Kosovo and Serbia, we can choose Serbia. And if we can choose Serbia, we're going to choose Serbia. So I think this is the stream of decision-making among the Kosovar Serbs once the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia has been put in place. As long as they see that Serbia has no chance in Kosovo, they are going to integrate inside Kosovo. Once they see that Serbia has chances in Kosovo, then they are going to take the other side, the old side. Therefore, this dialogue is not bringing Serbs of Kosovo closer to Kosovo, but rather north of Kosovo closer to Serbia and Serbia closer to EU. So this is the chain consequence of dialogue between Pristina and Belgrade. Meanwhile, European Union is rather focused in making sure that Kosovo is not going to prevent Serbia from the process of EU integration. Then it's stopping Serbia from preventing Kosovo in international integrations. We know very well that Serbia, with its diplomacy and economic relations, trade relations that it has with other countries, is doing everything to prevent Kosovo to become part of different international organizations. And the EU is not helping us much in preventing Serbia in this prevention of her toward international integration to Kosovo. But on the other hand, the EU is making sure that Kosovo is not going to prevent Serbia toward EU integration. There has been much say that Serbia has been put in front of this choice, Kosovo or EU. In the media, among the diplomats, politicians, you may have heard many times that now the international community has put Serbia, and Serbia has to choose whether it wants EU or Kosovo. But I don't believe that this is the case. I think that Belgrade noticed that there will be no pressure from EU to recognize the independence of Kosovo, since 5 out of 27 EU members do not recognize. So EU is divided regarding independence, and you cannot exercise pressure on Belgrade, and that is why Serbia thought that it can have both. It can have Kosovo and it can have EU. Apparently Serbia has 3 goals in relation to EU and Kosovo. First, not to be forced to recognize independence of Kosovo, and not to recognize independence of Kosovo. Second, to create a Serb territorial entity inside Kosovo, a state within a state. Third, to advance in EU integrations and become a member of EU before Kosovo. So these are the 3 goals. Not to recognize independence, to create autonomous territorial entity of Serbia inside Kosovo, and to join EU before Kosovo. In this way, Serbia wants to put Kosovo into a sandwich, to condition us from below with her state inside our state, similarly to Bosnia, and in the future to condition us from above, from the position of an EU member, similarly to Greece obstructions to Macedonia. So once Serbia is before Kosovo into EU, it can condition Kosovo to change different aspects of its territorial and institutional organization in order to become member of EU as well. In this way, occupation of Kosovo from the 90s would be replaced with control over Kosovo in the second decade of the 21st century, rendering Kosovo from a weak country into a failed country. So we are a weak state now, but we are at this crossroads. We can become a stronger state, or we can become a failed state. So I think that dialogue in Brussels is contributing to this later. Serbia proved that recognizes your external borders outside herself only once you recognize her internal boundaries inside you. Milosevic recognized Bosnia outside Serbia only after Izetbegovic recognized Serbia inside Bosnia. So in Dayton Conference 1995, Milosevic said, okay, Bosnia is not part of Serbia, Yugoslavia, whatever. But prior to that, it is Izetbegovic who recognized the Republika Srpska inside Bosnia. So they recognize you once you cannot recognize yourself. They recognize you once you recognize them inside. And I think that the same game is being played by Serbia over and over again. It is the same pattern. The means are different. Of course, people are not dying in Kosovo and Serbia. There are no more massacres. There are no more arbitrary murders. There is no more expulsion. But the political pattern is there. So the goals did not change. Rather, means changed. And I think mainly at the extent that circumstances changed. Key criteria for EU integration is good neighborly relations. Serbia could have easily achieved this by recognizing the independence of Kosovo. So if Serbia would recognize the independence of Kosovo, good neighborly relations, which are a precondition for EU integration, would be very much accomplished. But no, Serbia wants both EU and Kosovo. So there is this tension which dialogue in Brussels is masking as such. For Kosovo, the qualitative difference is between division on the ground and integration of the north, while for the international community, this difference is between partition and internal division. We could put two columns of words, in one would be written partition, on the other internal division. In the same first one, we could put border, in the second boundary. In Albanian language, we have the same word, kufi, for border and boundary. But in English language, there are two words, border and boundary. Boundary is weaker, is softer. And I think that this is what has happened in Bosnia. The price for preservation of external borders was creation of internal boundaries. When Milosevic recognized Bosnia with its external borders, it was only once Izetbegovic recognized Serbia with internal boundaries. In the map, external borders, they look stronger. But in reality, it is the internal boundaries who are stronger. And I think that this is a great danger for Kosovo as well. So nominally, to preserve external borders, but the price of this to be establishment of some internal boundaries. In Bosnia, Republika Srpska was realized fast, in a couple of weeks during negotiations in Dayton Conference in 1995. In Kosovo, the concessions of Ahtisaari Plan were accomplished within several months of negotiations in Vienna, while now in the negotiations in Brussels, concessions are made during a long process in small portions. If in Dayton we had concessions with big spoon, in Vienna with soup spoon, now in Brussels we have them with teaspoon. Concessions and the framework is there, the same one. What is changing is their velocity. Paul Virillo would have said everything is a matter of speedology, so it's just a matter of speed, how fast a certain thing is accomplished, and not what and why and how. On 9th of October 2009, Swedish Foreign Minister Carl Bildt and Deputy Secretary of State James Steinberg, US Deputy Secretary of State, wrote a joint letter to people of Bosnia which has a decisive sentence. A country that does not enjoy full sovereignty cannot be a credible candidate for EU membership. So they wrote this letter to people of Bosnia saying that it is not that Bosnia cannot become an EU member. It cannot become a candidate for EU membership. Not even that. Because you're not sovereign. You're dysfunctional. You lack sovereignty. So, this shows that EU is EU of sovereign states. The countries which became members of EU, they were sovereign countries. And now they are less sovereign. But the act of delegation of sovereignty was a sovereign act. And they can always get out from the Union. So they always have the last word, which is typical for a sovereign instance. Why all this is possible? So, of course, we see what is happening. We can also discuss about why it's happening. We can also agree or disagree what will happen. But why is this possible is, I believe, the key question. What enables this? What are those circumstances? What are those coordinates of the situation that enable, that become possibility for certain events and for certain developments? I think that in one hand we have hegemony of Serbian state, which is there in place and is a driving force behind what is happening. On the other hand, we have corruption of Kosovar politicians, who sometimes lack will, sometimes lack ideas, sometimes lack sincerity, very often all of these. But also, EU is both a factor in this scene and a factor within these two factors. So here I prescribe an additional role to EU that is playing in the situation. So one factor was hegemony of Serbian state. Second factor was the fact that Kosovar politicians are corrupted and blackmailed. And third factor is EU in a double manner. EU as a factor and EU as a factor in these two previous factors. In Kosovo, EU comes as an answer prior to any question and in order to prevent questions. So whenever you talk with an EU diplomat in Pristina or with Kosovar politicians, they say EU integration. Why EU integration is not allowed to be asked? That is an answer before the question. And our movement stands for the opposite of this. Not for the opposite of integration, but for the opposite of this order of things, where answer comes before question. And this means that we should ask ourselves, what kind of society we want? What kind of economy we want? What kind of state we want? And then part of the answer to be EU integration. And not to put in the face of people EU integration in order to block their ability to make questions. This would mean that we are forced to integrate into EU in a very anti-European way. If we just, like modern philosophy from René Descartes onwards, reaching truth through a method of systematic doubt. Here, you're not allowed to doubt at all anything. So here, you are supposed to integrate into EU. You can question anything else, but not this one. And once you do not question this, everything else is organized around this answer prior to the question. So I see this very problematic because we're moving further on from EU by trying to integrate into EU in a very non-European way. Of course, I don't like this dual-based dichotomy, whatever, East, West, Occident, Orient, etc. But if we conditionally accept for a second this, I would say that our politicians in Kosovo are imposed to love Occident in Oriental way. And this kind of love is love without self-respect. And once you love without self-respect, you neither get respected nor loved back. EU mission in Kosovo, through its executive powers, it maintains stability while tolerating local corruption. So there is a kind of marriage of interest. short-term stability is what EU cares about in Kosovo. 3 years ago, some 30 students from University of Constance, Germany, came to visit our movement. And I noticed in their master program was written conflict management. And I asked them what happened to the word resolution. It was such a nice word. Why not conflict resolution? Why conflict management? And some of them were laughing bitterly, some of them were confused. But this is what is at stake in Kosovo now. They compare us with other abnormal countries, with other crises in the world where the crisis has merit to be managed. They compare us with Afghanistan, with Palestine, and with Bosnia. It's better to compare us with Slovenia and to get the mark -10 than to compare us with Palestine and get the mark +2. Because we should be compared with a normal country in order to become one. But they pretend that they are normalizing us by always comparing us with other abnormal countries with other crises, where also people struggle for self-determination. But they do not compare us in that sense. Not in the sense that, of course, in other crises there are people who fight for justice and freedom and liberation. But in the sense that we are building a state which is not really a state because you're not really a people, and this is not really a normal situation, but nevertheless we're going to normalize. So I see this this paradigm of short-term stability, whose key word is crisis management, is the key problem of why we have such a weak state in Kosovo as we have now. Further on, stability in Kosovo is put at the service of stability of the region. Because they do not care only about stability in Kosovo, but about stability in the region. So stability in Kosovo is at the function of, is at the service, is a function and is at the service of stability in the region. And Serbia comes here as the key potential destabilizing power who must be listened first. And here I see the factor EU within the factor of hegemony of Serbian state. Because Belgrade knows very well that EU cares about stability. And when you care about stability, more you have potential for destabilization, more you are going to be listened. And Belgrade has Republika Srpska, North in Kosovo, all these other satellites, and through them blackmails EU, not publicly, not directly, but it is always there. Actually, what we have are two octopuses, or two state powers with satellites. With disintegration of former Soviet Union, we got a big octopus. Russia with Belarus, Ukraine, South Ossetia, Abkhazia, but also Armenia, Kyrgyzia, Tajikistan, and so on. So these are like satellite countries of Russia, and Russia is like a big octopus. With disintegration of former Yugoslavia, we got small octopus. Serbia, with Republika Srpska in Bosnia, with 30% of the population of Montenegro who declared themselves Serbs because they were against the independence of Montenegro. Serbian Orthodox Church all over, including Macedonia. North of Kosovo under parallel structures of Serbia. So small octopus and big octopus. And I understand that EU wants to separate small octopus from mother octopus from Russia. Because Serbia owes its existence to Russia. Serbian state was conceived and grew up as a concession of Ottoman Empire to Russia since the onset of the 19th century. So I understand that EU wants to separate Serbia from Russia. And now, probably you heard, Russia is going to build a humanitarian base near Niš, which is the second town, second city in Serbia. And you can see the irony here, humanitarian base. They want to say that if NATO intervention was humanitarian, our military base is humanitarian too. So there is like, what is the meaning of this humanitarian base? So, and also the components of gas and oil and etc. All this is terrifying Brussels. And I understand that EU wants to separate small octopus from the mother octopus. But this should not be at our expense. It is not Kosovo and Albanians who should pay for this. Let Brussels pay for it. Why we should pay for this? It's geostrategic, geopolitical interest of EU. Let Brussels pay for that. But now Serbia is saying, okay, I might reorient my view from Moscow to Brussels, but let me strengthen as a small octopus in the Balkans. So let me strengthen my tentacles. Let me strengthen my tentacles in the Balkans, and I distance myself from a big octopus. And it seems that Brussels is actually ready to make us pay the price for this. On the other hand, EU's vision for itself is a very important factor too. EU's viewpoint on state building in Kosovo, and I really think this is very important to discuss probably afterwards, is that EU does not think of state building in Kosovo as building a state, but as building a member state. So in Kosovo, they are building a state which will at the same time be built as a member state of EU. One day becoming member, not yet of course. So this is the vision of EU for Kosovo. It's two in one. It's head and shoulders shampoo. It's not like first to become a state, you get stronger, and then in the end you become a member state. No, two in one. They want two in one. They want we to become a member state at once. And this fits with Peter Faith, who is the former king of Kosovo, international civilian representative above all organizations. And he said a couple of years ago, Kosovo will be sovereign one day. You know what that means? That Kosovo will be sovereign one day, the day when it will delegate its sovereignty to EU. So we will be sovereign only in delegation of our sovereignty, never before that. And I think and believe that we should be sovereign for many years before joining EU. We should become first a state building as building a state, and then becoming a member state. And again, velocity, again, speedology, again, it's a matter of speed. It is much better to develop, to become democratic, sovereign first, and later on member state of EU, than to have this formula of two in one, which is EU-lex, EU performing and enforcing today in Kosovo. But now again, why is this so? Why EU thinks two in one? Why EU doesn't think one after the other? Why it doesn't think these two separate phases? Why is EU this? Is thinking like this? Well, not Versailles Conference of 1919, but Vienna Congress of 1815. Ernest Gellner proposes empires with provinces instead of nation states. I believe that here is probably part of the answer to this. Ernest Gellner wrote this book, Nationalism. I'm quoting here, of course, not like him, but I think his writings have consequences, and many world leaders agree with him, including those in Brussels, that actually now is not time which is similar to Versailles Conference, when you had self-determination of people and nation states emerging all over Europe and the world, anti-colonization, etc., struggles for liberation, independence, and all over Africa, Latin America, Asia. No. That was not a stable order. Stable order is order of empires, Belle Époque. So after Napoleon Bonaparte wars, we had Vienna Congress, and Vienna Congress 1815, and there empires got established. We had Romanovs Russia, Austro-Hungarian Empire with Habsburg Dynasty, and Ottoman Empire. So I think that Ernst Gellner is much more into this. He thinks that we should not have nation states anymore. We should have empires and provinces. I'm worried about this because world leaders agree with him. I noticed that on several occasions. And for big powers of our time, we cannot say that they anticipate when they speak and they predict. Because anticipation, prediction of a big power is a project. You cannot say that Brussels is predicting that or Mr. Obama is predicting this. The prediction of a big power is already a project. So that's why we should be worried about this. According to this vision, empires would be supranational, while provinces or city-states would be subnational. To this vision, for example, belong also the President of EU, Herman Van Rompuy, a federalist by conviction, who wants Europe as Europe of regions, and Robert Cooper, the political advisor of Catherine Ashton, who leads EU security and defense policy. Robert Cooper also wrote 2 books in this sense. One is Cracking the Nations, the other is Postmodern State, and he affirms this concept of new liberal imperialism. So he doesn't say actually supranational, he says transnational. He speaks of flexible sovereignty between states, but basically it leads to the same, like empire and provinces. And what is even more important, left hand of the state in Pierre Bourdieu terms would be left to the provinces, like allegedly the hand of the mother, culture, art, education, healthcare, will be left to the soul, will be left to these provinces, city-states. While the hand of the father, the right wing hand, would belong to the empire, army, anti-terrorism, prevention of nuclear attacks,